Welcome back, friends, to part 4 of my Frozen Titans playthrough on Unfair Difficulty. Up top, we've got the status of my mechs. We've got Rosy Rivets and a heavily upgraded Aegis mech with Vortex Fist. Good old Ralph Carlson in a Mirror mech with Smoke Drop and heavily upgraded Guided Missile. And then starting pilot Lita in a Ice mech with minimal upgrades, but it really doesn't need a lot of upgrades. And we can see that our final corporate island is Detritus. We've got beetles and burrowers. But I'm not terribly concerned about the Op4 for this island. So I'm inclined to do this 1-rep mission here in the middle of the map, just because it's going to unlock the most options for me to proceed. And it doesn't look too terrible. You know, we just have to prevent 3 grid damage, but right off the bat we get the Mosquito Leader. And knowing this, I am very, very careful to place my mech deployment in such a way that none of them will be a target for the Mosquito Leader. The Mosquito Leader, it webs and smokes a target, and then it also inflicts instant death. I don't even think shields or being frozen would help you. So you really need to be careful. I'm hoping to negate the threat posed by this creature right away. We've also got a very large conveyor belt, and if I am not mistaken, I think burrowers are incapable of spawning on conveyor belt tiles. So it weirdly restricts the burrower's movement, which is kind of to our advantage. So we have 3 threats to the grid. We have the Scorpion, the Burrower that got past the belt, and the Mosquito Leader. I'm pretty sure that even though it's targeting a shielded building, it would still be destroyed. And I have to be cognizant of how the enemies are going to move on the conveyor belt. So as you can see, I froze the Mosquito Leader, and after the conveyor belt moves, the Alpha Beetle will be in a position to break the ice mech free. So I have to be careful about placement for my other mechs here. I'm going to use the Smoke Drop because I have limited ability to stop the Scorpion. Even though the conveyor belt will move it, it is still going to attack the grid, so I just drop the smoke to cancel its attack out. And also, hopefully, try to dissuade any further attacks on the grid from that kind of southern side, the side facing the enemy side of the board. So, relatively painless first round. But we still have these burrowers hanging out. We're gonna have to do something about them. So, this turn, we have one legitimate threat to the grid on the western side from the burrower on B6. The other burrower is targeting 2 shielded buildings, so I could afford to ignore it if need be. We get a nice 2-for-1 there. Bump damage will send the burrower packing, and we kill that Alpha Beetle. We can ignore the Scarab, because the conveyor belt is just going to have it, you know, shoot its attack onto a mountain tile. So that just leaves the other burrower. I believe that Ralph is capable of surviving a hit from the Alpha Scorpion. I'm just, you know, ideally I want to break the ice mech free if I can. So we're going to do that. It will inflict some self-damage on Ralph, but he should be okay. Oh, that's right. I accidentally discover some interesting Rosy Rivets synergy here. Rosy does a repair when she ends her move next to an ally, which apparently breaks frozen mechs free. So I can simply do the Spartan Shield on the Scorpion, and Ralph is left unscathed. I'm not sure I was aware of this before I recorded this run, so we can add Rosy Rivets to the list of pilots that have synergy with the Frozen Titans, as long as Rosy herself is not in the ice mech. So now it's our penultimate turn. We still only have one real legitimate threat to the grid, that being the ever-irritating burrowers. We do a little goofy maneuver here with the Vortex Fist. It lets me destroy 2 Vec. And, I freeze a random grid building. Just, why not? Our final turn is just a 2v3, so we should be in good shape here. This was a pretty painless first mission for our 4th island. Once again, when you're on the 4th island of an unfair run, you're facing nothing but alphas, and you also get Boss Vec spawning. So that is a clean little run. That beetle's going to commit Sudoku for us. They're silly little guys. And we will see how my mission selection pans out. We get our first time pod, and we get the light tank, which is an interesting little drop. I am now going to consider how I'm going to juggle my power cores. It would be fun to use the light tank. So I equip it on the ice mech, because it'll give the ice mech at least something to do that's not self-freezing, if need be. And it'll do a little bit of core shuffling. As much as it is to have the movement bonus on the ice mech, we're at least going to turn the light tank on, so we have the option to deploy it. At minimum upgrades, it only has 1 HP and does a non-damaging push attack, but it's still a nice little action multiplier. So I have multiple options available to us, including a Destroy the Acid Storm Controller mission with a bonus power core. Now that I've just gotten a deployable tank, my demands for power cores has suddenly increased significantly. So I'm feeling spicy, and I decide to take this mission next. It'll be a 6v3 at the beginning of the mission. However, everyone will be soaked with acid, hopefully allowing us to quickly thin the ranks of the enemy horde. So we've got a pair of burrowers, a pair of beetles, and an alpha scarab to deal with, as well as a regeneration scion. So it's really a 5v3 functionally. We just have to ensure that we destroy the Acid Storm Controller at some point, and we have to make sure that our mechs take less than 4 damage. I'm not terribly worried about that because we are going to be doing self-freezing, and the Aegis mech also self-shields. So as long as things are going relatively normally, only the mirror mech will be probably taking damage. So we have 3 threats to the grid. We're somewhat lucky in that one of the beetles and one of the burrowers kind of wastes their turn. So I think the play here is I'm going to defend the grid from the non-burrowing threats. And then I can use the burrower to destroy the Acid Storm Controller for us, and we can use the acid to protect the grid. So our next turn is a functional 3v3. No more universal acid application. We have to be careful because we're going to start getting enemy spawns. I see a nice opportunity for the Vortex Fist to show us some value. This would be a good turn for the Ice Mech to deploy its tank. And thanks to the fact that burrowers are immune to forced movement, we don't actually accidentally damage. The ice mech with bump damage, which is nice. And we have the extra HP to spare on spawn blocking. So our next turn will be a functional 4v1 our favor. Or a 1v4, I think that's how I prefer to state these weird little calculations of mine. So now, really, it being the penultimate turn, as many spawns as we can block will be to our advantage. And then I destroy the Scion. Why not? So our final turn will be a 2v4. A pretty painless mission, once again. This being the ice and snow themed squad, does it feel like I am snowballing here? As I've talked about the concept before, it is the ability to, build in strength such that your momentum becomes unstoppable. Note that I just smoked those final 2 Vec without bothering to kill them because all of my pilots are now max XP. I was a bit disappointed to see Rosie gets +3 grid defense, but as I've talked about before, my pilots, they just weren't especially fantastic on this run. But I have to, work with what I am given here. And we are fortunate to have the ever-popular Defend the Disposal unit. As I like to call it, it's a free mission. So once again, we have a very similar op4 to the beginning of the last mission, except that we have a Mosquito instead of Scion. I am deploying my mechs in the hopes that I can use the disposal unit to start swiftly thinning the ranks of the enemy. And then we also get our second time pod, which is nice. So we have quite a few threats to the grid. I believe all 6 of the enemies... No, only 5. One of the beetles is just attacking the Aegis mech. Yes, the disposal unit is excellent at giving us multiple action solves here. This calls for the smoke drop early on. Gets us a 2-for-1. And that just leaves the Aegis mech to take care of the burrower over there, and that gives us also the time to deploy our tank in case we need it. This is an extremely minor misplay, but I should have just deployed the tank right there. I would have been mopping up less of the acid on the ground in the hopes that the enemy would coat themselves in it. One of the other mission objectives here is to destroy all mountains, so I get to do kind of a multitasking. Here I can get started on some of the mountains being melted and get rid of that other burrower. Now it's just a matter of taking care of the rest of the enemies, which should not be too big of a deal. It's interesting that Rosie's special ability also heals status effects. You'll note that the light tank was soaked in acid and is now clean. Not that a 1 HP unit being coated in acid makes much of a difference, but it is still worth noting. With only 2 Vec to deal with, I believe we can handle them with our units. So we can use the disposal unit to finish off its mission objective. Our final turn will be a very manageable, functional, 2v6 our favor? If we're counting the disposal unit, which we should. So we've only got one more mission to go before our boss fight for the island. Things are going pretty well. We're moving along here at a decent clip. And that's GG. A clean board wipe. With our new power core, I believe I elect to just invest it. Oh, I've already invested in getting the movement upgrade going. Now we've got the +2 HP for the tank, which lets it do things such as sit on spawns. It's just a nice overall upgrade. Now, for my final mission before the boss fight, I had 2 choices. I had defend the VIPs or destroy the acid vats. I was feeling pretty confident about either of them. It's kind of just up to taste. But I'm very fond of defend the VIPs. You know, those cute little jeeps. And I'm going to be deploying a little tank, so why not just have more little fun, you know, allied units on the board in their little olive drab, green color scheme. I have to be a little bit careful here because we've got a Scorpion leader. You know, they gave us certainly a lot of trouble on our first island back in Archive. But this is also a usually rather favorable map seed for the player. The enemy side of the board is pretty barren. And then we are also somewhat fortunate in how the enemy deploys themselves on the first turn. So we've only got really one threat to the grid in the form of that burrower, and then we have to save one of the jeeps. It's just a question now of how do I play it. I was quick to kill the Scorpion leader, but it appears that I spend some time now considering my options. I was not sure if that was the best play. Really, I'm still in good shape. I could just move the Jeep. It's easy enough to do. Ah, here it is. I do a misplay. I decided, oh, I'm going to use the light tank to do bump damage, but I forget that I cannot move the burrowers. So I can still do this successfully, but it does cost me my temporal reset. A little bit costly, a little bit indulgent. But I'm hoping that I will not be unduly punished for it. We are fortunate in that the Alpha Beetle is going to delete itself for us. So our next turn will be a functional 2v4, no, 3v4 our favor? Yeah, we've still got 2 burrowers. They're kind of hard to keep track of as they dip underground. things are moving along pretty straightforward here. I just have to decide on how I'm going to aid our friend Ralph Carlson. Yes, I make an interesting choice here. I could have just freed Ralph with the light tank. Instead, I make a somewhat kind of risky play by leaving the ice mech frozen. Perhaps I was banking on Rosie being able to free the ice mech for me, and I believe indeed that I can do that. But that was a little bit of a risky play. If that burrower had moved somewhere, less convenient, perhaps the ice mech would have been stuck. But I am otherwise in pretty decent shape. Looks like I wind up not using the light tank's action this turn. I could have blocked the spawn with the frozen alpha beetle, but that was kind of, a wash. Either we have to deal with a free alpha beetle, or we have to deal with a different Vec emerging fresh, and, it was a mosquito. It's fine. Yes, apologies how sometimes on these 4th island playthroughs, I don't have a lot of commentary. Just because, our squad is, late in its evolution. Hopefully, if things are going well, you are comfortably and cleanly taking care of the threats. But, with that said, perhaps I was saving my mental energy for the final mission of the island, the boss fight against the bouncer leader. Things do not quite go my way here. And upon, a subsequent viewing of this battle, it's a little bit difficult to pinpoint exactly what went wrong. So, part of it is my choice of deployment. I put the Aegis mech closer to the bouncer leader because I wanted to make sure that I could get rid of the boss as quickly as possible, and I figured it was my main sort of attack mech. But even that was perhaps a misplay, because the bouncer leader doesn't care so much about getting its direction swapped. Perhaps I was very much banking on it attacking the corporate tower, and indeed it does. That goes according to plan. However, the other issues become the western side of the board. Column A, B, C, and, D. This is where I'm going to be getting a lot of problems. Because for the rest of this mission, it's always going to feel like my mechs are just a little bit out of position. It's difficult to explain why exactly, but you'll see as the battle unfolds. I very quickly take care of the bouncer leader, but then I have 4 other threats to the grid to deal with, and only 2 mechs with which to do anything about it. And none of them are in a position, really, where I can, do any good body blocking with the ice mech. I do have the smoke drop, which will let me cancel out one of these pairs of threats. I just have to be very deliberate about my choice. I also have the choice of whether or not I want to try and deploy my light tank. But yes, this is a tricky turn. And also, part of the other problem with this turn is I think I do not do very much actually, killing, which means we're going to be getting a spawn in, so our next turn will be a 5v3, possibly 5v4 if I can get the mech, or the light tank deployed. So I think the best that I can do is do a very risky body block against the beetle leader. There we go. So I at least negate the burrower. I can body block to take only 1 grid damage instead of 2, although that leaves the mirror mech in critical condition. And then the smoke drop lets me cancel out the scarabs. I get a little bit of luck there. For the second time on this run, we get a successful grid defense. But then, things continue to get really weird. You know, we still have an enemy threatening our corporate tower, so, you know, the Aegis mech is the one for the job. I suppose I could have used the ice mech to freeze that scarab, and then the beetle leader would have freed it. Maybe that would have been the better play, and I could have used the Aegis mech to move closer to the western side of the board. I think also the smoke trail hurts me from the guided missile. You know, we've smoked that one space, but my ability to maneuver is quite limited. Ah, here we go. I see that I could have frozen the scarab. But this leaves me somewhat unhappy, because that meant that the Aegis mech, you know, has sort of wasted its action, just kind of damaging something that is now frozen. And I think in a fit of dissatisfaction, I use a temporal reset here. Not sure that was the best call. Because that still leaves the question of what is the Aegis mech going to do? Where is it going to go? We still leave that square of smoke behind, which I think is going to wind up hurting me more than it helps. And then I could send the Aegis mech, you know, closer to the western side of the board, but I don't like the prospect of leaving an alpha beetle just sitting there in my backline, so I have the Aegis mech sit there. Again, not sure if that was the best call. This turn is a functional 4v4. And yet we have this nasty... No, it's a 4v5. I forgot. Or 5v4. The burrowers are hard to keep track of. And we have this really unpleasant congestion. This turn is a nasty one. Because the Aegis mech is not in a position to contribute very much of use. The only thing it can really do to help us is damage the burrower on D6. That leaves the other units to try and do something about the beetle leader and that scarab. But I am really caught in a bind here. With the burrower blocking the way, the mirror mech and the light tank are not in a good position to really help us here. And again, that smoke, leave smoke behind upgrade is actively harming me. If it wasn't for that smoke upgrade, then the light tank would be in a position to, you know, actually fire. It would have a clear firing path. So this playthrough, you know, I was curious to experiment with the smoke behind upgrade. But I think if I use the guided missile again, barring very specific, very niche circumstances, I don't think I would upgrade that again. I think it's harmful more than it helps. I think we're going to skip ahead a little bit. I think it takes me a while to commit to a course of action here. Okay, so the best I can come up with is to freeze the beetle leader and, you know, try to get some damage on the board. But I'm really into bad shape here. I commit the cardinal sin of the Frozen Titans. Here on my, the final mission before the volcanic hive, I have done the thing you should never do, which is to leave the ice mech frozen. And we lose a grid health in the process. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 Vec to deal with. A 5v3 functionally. The best I can do is defend the corporate tower. And then I lack the ability to do much else to save our hide. And we lose 3 grid health. Brutal. So what was otherwise a perfect island, and technically a perfect island as far as perfect island rewards are concerned, but we still lose 3 grid health. We were doing so well. Kind of a disappointing end to this stint on detritus. We get boosters, which is pretty useful, silica, and grid defense. I wonder if I should have maybe gone with boosters. Instead, I decided to top off my grid, and I think I'm just going to sink all of my rep into power cores. None of the things that were available for sale were especially game-changing with the pilots and other things I had available. So I think I buy power cores. I'm going to fully upgrade the light tank so that instead of a non-damaging, it does a 2 damage attack, which is kind of cool. I think I leave on the smoke trail on the guided missile for some reason, and then we are going to tackle the final island next time. We'll see if the Frozen Titans can save the day. Join me for our next iteration.